At my sister's wedding, she grabbed the microphone to give a toast. But instead of talking about love or her future, she pointed a manicured finger directly at me and called me unwanted used goods. The entire ballroom erupted in laughter. Even my own mother covered her mouth to hide a giggle, and my father looked away ashamed to claim me. But then the groom stood up. He did not laugh. He snatched the microphone from my sister's hand, and the room froze. What he said next did not just end the wedding. It ended my parents' entire lifestyle and exposed a lie they had been hiding for a decade. My name is Nia. As I sit here in my penthouse swirling a glass of vintage Pinot Noir and looking out at the glittering Chicago skyline, it is hard to believe that just 24 hours ago, my own family treated me like a stray dog begging for scraps at a royal banquet. They measure human worth by the brand of your shoes and the zip code of your house. They have absolutely no idea that the very luxury building they admire from afar belongs to the daughter they despise. But before I tell you how I evicted my toxic parents from their own fantasy world, please hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever been the black sheep who turned out to be the wolf. Let me take you back to yesterday afternoon. The setting was the Golden Vineyards Resort in Napa Valley, a place where the air smells like old money and lavender. I pulled up to the grand entrance, not in a limousine, but in my rusted 2010 Honda Civic. The muffler rattled so loudly it turned heads, but not in a good way. I have kept this car for sentimental reasons. It was the vehicle I lived in with my son when I first started my logistics company. To me, it is a badge of honor. To my family, it is just proof of my failure. As I rolled down the window to hand my keys to the valet, a burly security guard stepped in front of my car, blocking my path with his body. He did not even look me in the eye. He simply pointed his thumb toward a narrow gravel service road hidden behind a row of tall hedges. Deliveries and kitchen staff parking are around the back, he barked, barely hiding his annoyance. This main entrance is for guests only. I took a deep breath, fighting the urge to correct him. I am a guest, I said calmly, forcing a polite smile. I am actually the bride's sister. The guard looked at my faded t-shirt, then glanced at the dent in my car door and let out a scoff that sounded painfully familiar. He clearly did not believe a word I said. Before I could protest further, a gleaming white Mercedes G-Wagon roared up behind me, honking impatiently. The guard's demeanor changed instantly. He bowed and scraped as the passenger door opened. Out stepped my sister Tasha. She looked like a magazine cover come to life, draped in white designer silk, her massive diamond engagement ring catching the sunlight. She lowered her sunglasses and looked at me. There was no hello, no smile, just a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. She turned to the guard and said loud enough for everyone in the valet line to hear, "Tell the Uber driver to move her junk heap immediately. My fiancé's family is arriving, and I do not want this eyesore ruining the aesthetic of my entrance." I stared at her, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. She knew exactly who I was. She just did not want to admit that the woman in the Honda was her blood. I unbuckled Leo from his car seat and took his small hand in mine. He looked up at me with wide, innocent eyes, tugging at his collared shirt, which I had ironed perfectly that morning. To him, this was a magical party. To me, it was a battlefield. As we walked through the massive oak doors of the resort ballroom, the scent of expensive perfume and fresh lilies hit us like a physical wave. The room was a masterpiece of excess. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling, casting a golden glow over hundreds of guests. Every table was draped in imported silk, centered with towering floral arrangements that probably cost more than my first car. I scanned the room looking for the seating chart, but I did not have to look for long. My mother Patricia spotted us instantly. She was holding a glass of champagne, laughing with a group of women from her church choir. The moment her eyes landed on me, her smile vanished. She excused herself and rushed over not to welcome us, but to intercept us, moving with the frantic energy of a hostess trying to hide a stain on the carpet before the VIPs noticed. "Nia," she hissed, grabbing my elbow with a grip that was painful enough to leave a bruise. What are you doing standing in the middle of the entryway? You are blocking the flow of the servers. Hello to you too, Mom, I said, keeping my voice steady. You look lovely. Leo, forgetting that his grandmother was a woman of ice and stone, let go of my hand and reached out to hug her. Hi, Grandma. Look at my tie. Patricia actually took a step back, recoiling as if my 10-year-old son were contagious. She smoothed down her dress, looking terrified that his small hands might wrinkle the fabric. Not now, Leo, she snapped without even looking at his face. Grandma is wearing vintage silk. Go stand over there. Leo's arms dropped to his sides and the light in his eyes dimmed. I felt a surge of heat rise in my chest, a mixture of protective rage and heartbreak. Before I could defend him, my mother turned her laser focus back to me. Listen, there has been a change in the seating arrangements, she said, steering us forcefully away from the main floor. Tasha is live streaming the entrance of the bridal party in 20 minutes. She wants a very specific aesthetic for the background. Aesthetic, I asked, pulling my arm from her grip. You mean she does not want her rich friends to see us? Lower your voice, Patricia whispered harshly. Look at you. You are wearing a dress from a department store rack, and Leo looks like he is going to a school recital. We cannot have you in the frame when the camera pans across the room. It ruins the vibe. She marched us past the tables filled with extended family, past the tables for friends, and even past the table for the band members. We walked all the way to the back of the room, near the swinging double doors of the kitchen. There, set up against the wall next to the emergency exit, and the restrooms, was a small folding card table covered with a plain white sheet. There was no floral centerpiece, no name cards, just 2 chairs and the overwhelming clatter of dishes being washed in the kitchen behind us. Table 19, Patricia declared, gesturing to the folding chairs. You will sit here, and please try to keep Leo quiet. The acoustics in this room are sensitive, and we do not want any disruptions during the speeches. She turned on her heel and walked away, transforming instantly back into the gracious hostess, as she rejoined her friends, laughing as if she hadn't just banished her own daughter and grandson to the corner. We sat down. The table was wobbly. Every time a waiter kicked open the kitchen door, a blast of hot food-scented air hit us. Mommy, Leo whispered, looking down at his plastic plate. Is Grandma mad at me? Did I do something wrong? I looked at my son, seeing the confusion and hurt etching into his young features. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip this cheap table over and drag my mother by her pearls. But I did neither. I reached across and squeezed Leo's hand. No, baby, I lied, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Grandma is just very stressed. It is a big day. But as I watched my mother across the room clinking glasses with the mayor's wife, the excuse tasted like ash in my mouth. My sadness was rapidly evaporating, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't just going to sit at table 19, I was going to own this entire room. The quiet humiliation of sitting by the kitchen doors was interrupted by a sudden hush falling over the ballroom. The main doors swung open and Tasha made her grand entrance. I have to admit, she looked breathtaking. Her dress was a custom masterpiece with a lace bodice and a train that cascaded behind her like a river of white silk. But as she scanned the room, her eyes did not land on her groom or her parents. They landed on me. She snapped her fingers, a sharp sound that cut through the low murmur of the crowd. Nia, she called out, her voice dripping with faux sweetness that did not mask the command underneath. Come here. I need you. I froze. Leo looked up at me, confused. Go ahead, Mom, he whispered. Auntie Tasha needs help. I did not want to leave him, but making a scene now would only hurt my son more. I stood up and walked toward her, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes on my back. When I reached her, she did not say hello. She simply turned her back to me and gestured at the floor. Pick it up, she hissed under her breath. My maid of honor has a bad back, and this train weighs 50 pounds. You are doing it. I stared at her. Tasha. I am a guest, I whispered back. I am wearing a dress. I am not working today. Her smile did not waver for the cameras, but her eyes narrowed into slits. You are here because I allowed you to be here, she muttered through gritted teeth. Now pick up the dress before I have security escort you out for trespassing. I felt the blood drain from my face. I bent down and gathered the heavy fabric in my arms. For the next hour, I became a prop in her vanity show. Every time the photographer asked for a new angle, Tasha snapped her fingers, and I had to shuffle behind her, adjusting the silk so it pooled perfectly around her feet. I was sweating. My back ached. I was invisible to everyone except as a servant. Then came the group photo near the ice sculpture. The photographer shouted, "Everyone squeeze in closer." Tasha took a step back. She did not just step, she stomped. Her 4-inch stiletto heel came down directly onto my toes. The pain was blinding. I audibly gasped and nearly dropped the dress, instinctively pulling my foot back. Tasha did not apologize. She did not even look concerned. She let out a high-pitched tinkling laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Oh, Nia, you are so clumsy," she exclaimed loud enough for the groom's family to hear. "Watch where you are standing." She grabbed my arm ostensibly to steady me, but her nails dug into my skin. She pulled me close, her cheek brushing against mine in a mockery of a sisterly embrace. The camera flashed, capturing us cheek to cheek. In that split second, while the flash blinded me, she whispered directly into my ear, "Do not ruin my day with your clumsiness, you leech. Just hold the dress and shut up." The moment Tasha swept away to greet the groom's parents, the real sharks began to circle. My aunts Beatrice and Sarah descended upon me with glasses of champagne in their hands and judgment in their eyes. These were women who spent every Sunday in the front pew of the church, yet possessed tongues sharp enough to slice through steel. They did not come to ask how I was doing. They came to compare. Aunt Beatrice, adjusting a hat that looked ridiculous enough to be expensive, looked me up and down. Her gaze lingered on my scuffed heels. "You know, Nia," she began, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "It is a miracle Tasha found someone like Liam, a tech CEO. That is real security." She turned to Aunt Sarah. "Can you imagine the wedding gifts I heard his family is giving them? A villa in Tuscany?" Aunt Sarah nodded enthusiastically, then turned her predatory gaze toward me. "It is just such a relief that at least one of you girls made something of herself. We were so worried about the family reputation after your situation." She left the word hanging in the air like a bad smell. My situation. That was their code word for my life, for my son, for my independence. I took a sip of water, refusing to let them see me flinch. "I am doing just fine, Aunt Sarah," I said calmly. "My business is expanding, and Leo is top of his class." Beatrice waved her hand dismissively, as if swatting away a fly. "Oh, honey, a little delivery business is hardly a legacy. We are talking about dynasty building here." Tasha secured the bag. She paused, leaning in closer, her perfume overpowering. "Any news on a father figure for Leo? A boy needs a man, not just a struggling mother." Before I could respond, a heavy hand landed on my shoulder. It was my father, Desmond. He smelled of aged scotch and expensive cologne, a scent bought on credit he could not afford. I stiffened, hoping for a second that he might defend me. Instead, he raised his glass to the aunts. "Do not waste your breath, Beatrice," my father boomed, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of the nearby tables. "Tasha is the crown jewel of the Jenkins family." She listened. She invested in her appearance. She played the game. He squeezed my shoulder, not with affection, but with a grip that felt like a warning. "Nia here." He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Nia is the family's disappointment. She is the cautionary tale I tell my friends when they ask why I look so tired. She had potential, but she threw it away to play martyr." The aunts chuckled politely, sipping their drinks. I felt the heat rise up my neck, burning my ears. In their eyes, my worth was zero because I wasn't hanging on the arm of a rich man. They saw a failure. They had no idea they were looking at the person who secretly paid off the mortgage on the house they celebrated Christmas in last year. My father looked down at me, his eyes cold and glazed with alcohol. Try not to embarrass us today, Nia. Just sit in the back and be quiet. Tasha is the star. You are just the background noise. He walked away, followed by the aunts who were already gossiping about the floral arrangements. I stood there alone in the crowd, but I did not cry. I did not run to the bathroom to weep like I would have done 10 years ago. Instead, I slowly reached into my clutch, my hand wrapped around my phone. I felt the cool metal against my palm. I glanced down at the screen, confirming the red light was pulsing. Recording duration 3 minutes and 14 seconds. I slid the phone back into my bag and took a deep breath. Let them talk. Let them dig their own graves with their words. I was not just a guest at this wedding anymore. I was the archivist of their destruction. The ambient noise of the ballroom faded as the lights dimmed, replaced by the soft swelling chords of a string quartet. A single spotlight cut through the darkness, finding Tasha standing on the raised dais. She held the microphone with a delicate grip, her other hand resting theatrically on her chest. This was her moment. It was the performance she had been rehearsing in the mirror since she was 12 years old. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, her voice quivering with practiced emotion. Thank you for being here to witness the happiest day of my life. A ripple of applause moved through the room. I sat in the shadows next to the swinging kitchen doors, watching the silhouette of my sister against the blinding light. From this distance, she looked like an angel. But I knew better. I knew that the diamond earrings catching the light were bought with the emergency fund I had sent my father for his blood pressure medication. I knew the vintage champagne in her glass was paid for by the second mortgage on the house I owned. Tasha continued, turning her teary eyes toward our parents. Mom, Dad, you two are my rocks. You taught me that in this world you have to demand the best because you deserve the best. You sacrificed everything to make sure I never had to settle for mediocrity. My mother, Patricia, dabbed at her dry eyes with a silk handkerchief. My father puffed out his chest, looking every bit the proud patriarch, completely ignoring the fact that his bank accounts had been overdrawn since Tuesday. It was a masterclass in collective delusion. They were rewriting history in real time, painting themselves as noble aristocrats instead of the financial parasites they actually were. I looked down at Leo. He was quietly eating a bread roll, the only food that had made it to our table so far. He looked up at me and whispered, Mommy, why is Aunt Tasha crying? Is she sad? No, baby, I whispered back. She is acting. Just watch. On stage, Tasha took a sip of water, preparing for the second act of her monologue. The mood in the room shifted. She let out a small, self-deprecating laugh that sounded rehearsed. You know, growing up, I always knew I was different. I wanted more. I looked at the world and saw opportunities where others saw obstacles. And that is why I found Liam. She gestured to her new husband. Liam smiled weakly. He looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. Unlike my family, Liam was genuine. He came from old money, yes, but he had built his own tech empire from the ground up. He valued hard work. I often wondered if he had any idea who he had really married. Tasha's expression hardened imperceptibly. The sweetness remained in her voice, but the intent behind it sharpened like a knife. She needed a villain to make her hero narrative complete. She needed a contrast to make her shine brighter. She scanned the room, her eyes skipping over the wealthy investors, the politicians, and the socialites. Her gaze traveled all the way to the back, past the buffet line, until it locked onto the dark corner near the kitchen. But I cannot forget where I came from, Tasha said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that echoed through the silent hall. We do not choose our family, but we do choose our paths. And I want to give a special thanks to my sister. Tasha raised her champagne flute higher, the bubbles catching the spotlight like tiny sparks of fire. She paused for effect, letting the silence stretch until every person in the room was hanging on her next breath. Then she delivered the blow she had been saving for years. Thank you, Nia, she said, her voice steady and projecting clearly to the back of the room. Thank you for being the ultimate cautionary tale. Growing up watching you make mistake after mistake was the greatest education I could have asked for. You showed me exactly what happens when a woman lacks ambition. You showed me the consequences of settling for less. Because of your broken path, I learned to pave my own with gold. You are the cracked mirror that reflects my perfection even more clearly. For a heartbeat, there was silence. I stopped breathing. I gripped the edge of the wobbly folding table so hard my fingernails dug into the cheap wood laminate. I expected someone to gasp. I expected someone to look shocked. I expected the heir to leave the room out of sheer horror at a bride attacking her own sister on her wedding day. But that is not what happened. Instead, a low chuckle started from the front table. It was my father. He had his hand over his mouth, his shoulders shaking, trying to stifle a laugh that bubbled up from his chest. That single sound broke the dam. Suddenly, the entire ballroom erupted. It wasn't just a polite titter, it was a roar of laughter. The guests, these wealthy, sophisticated people in their designer tuxedos and evening gowns, threw their heads back and laughed at my humiliation. I looked around, my vision blurring. I saw my Aunt Beatrice wiping a tear of mirth from her eye. I saw Tasha's bridesmaids clutching each other, pointing in my direction. They were not looking at a human being. They were looking at a punchline. To them, my struggle as a single mother, my years of hard work, my sacrifices were nothing more than a joke to entertain them between courses. Tasha stood on the stage beaming. She soaked up the laughter like it was applause. She looked at me with a triumphant smirk, her eyes saying what her lips did not have to. You are nothing. You are dirt. You are here only to make me look taller. The cameraman, sensing the moment, swung his heavy lens around. I saw the red tally light blink on. He was zooming in on my face. He wanted to capture the tears. He wanted the reaction shot of the pathetic, jealous sister to complete the narrative. I felt a small hand tugging at my sleeve. Leo was looking at me, his bottom lip trembling. "Why are they laughing at us, Mommy?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper over the noise of the crowd. "Are we the clowns?" His question hit me harder than any insult Tasha could have thrown. I looked at my son, the boy I had protected with every ounce of my strength, now sitting in the crosshairs of my family's cruelty. The heat that had been building in my chest turned into something else. It turned into ice. Cold, hard, unforgiving ice. I looked directly into the camera lens. I did not blink. I did not look away. I let them capture my face, but I made sure they did not capture a victim. I composed my features into a mask of stone. Let them laugh, I thought. Let them enjoy this moment, because it is the last time any of them will ever smile at my expense. They think this is the climax of the show. They have no idea it is just the opening act of their funeral. As the laughter from Tasha's speech began to subside, my mother reached out and took the microphone from her. I watched Patricia stand up, smoothing the front of her champagne-colored gown. She looked elegant, composed, and completely soulless. She put a hand on Tasha's shoulder, beaming with a pride that she had never, not once in 32 years, directed at me. "You are so right, my darling," Patricia said. Her voice amplified through the speakers, crisp and clear. "We raised you to understand your value. We raised you to preserve your virtue and your reputation, because a woman is like a fine garment. Once it is stained, once it is torn, it never holds the same value again." She turned her gaze toward me. It was not a look of anger. It was something worse. It was a look of pity, mixed with disdain, the way one looks at a piece of furniture left out on the curb for trash collection. "Your sister chose a different path." Patricia continued, sighing dramatically into the microphone. She chose to give herself away cheaply. And look at her now. No husband, no prospects, just a life full of struggle. It is a hard lesson, but it is the truth. Tasha is a pristine diamond, untouched and flawless. Nia is, well, let us be honest, Nia is used goods. And in this market, nobody is looking to invest in damaged inventory. The cruelty of her words hung in the air. Used goods. My own mother had just reduced my entire existence, my struggles and my survival, to the status of a discarded object. The room did not gasp this time. They nodded. I saw heads bobbing in agreement, murmuring that she had a point. In their world, a single mother was a failure of character, a warning sign to be avoided. Then a sound broke through the murmurs that shattered my heart more than any insult could. It was a small, choked sob. I looked down. Leo had dropped his bread roll. His face was crumpled, tears streaming down his cheeks. He might not have understood the nuances of the phrase used goods, but he understood the tone. He understood that his grandmother was looking at his mother like she was something dirty. He understood that he was the baggage she was referring to. "Mommy," he cried out, his voice cracking. "Why does Grandma hate us?" That was it. The invisible string that had been holding me in that chair snapped. I did not care about the wedding. I did not care about making a scene. I cared about getting my son out of this toxic snake pit before it poisoned him completely. I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the floor, drawing every eye in the room back to me. I did not look at Tasha. I did not look at my parents. I reached down and grabbed Leo's hand, pulling him gently to his feet. "Come on, Leo," I said, my voice shaking with suppressed rage. "We are leaving." I grabbed my purse, ignoring the whispers that erupted around us. "She is running away," I heard someone say. "She cannot handle the truth," said another. I turned toward the exit, ready to walk out and never look back. I was ready to cut them off forever, to leave them to their delusions of grandeur. But before I could take a single step, a loud crash echoed from the head table. It sounded like glass shattering against the floor. The room went dead silent. I froze and turned back. At the main table, Liam the groom was standing up. His face was not flushed with embarrassment. It was pale with fury. A broken wineglass lay at his feet, red wine pooling on the white carpet like blood. He was staring directly at my mother, his chest heaving. He did not look like a man in love. He looked like a man who had just woken up from a nightmare. The sound that followed was violent and absolute. It was the sound of heavy crystal shattering against marble. Liam had stood up so abruptly that his chair toppled backward with a clatter. But nobody heard that part, because at the same second he swept his arm across the head table. The tower of champagne flutes, the expensive floral arrangement, and the half-empty bottles of wine went crashing to the floor. The destruction was instant. The red wine splashed across the pristine white tablecloths and dripped onto the floor, looking disturbingly like a crime scene. The laughter in the ballroom cut off, as if someone had severed the power cord. 1 second, hundreds of people were cackling at my humiliation. The next, the only sound in the cavernous room was the dripping of wine and the jagged breathing of the groom. I stopped with my hand on the brass handle of the exit door. Leo pressed his face into my leg, trembling, but I turned around. I had to see what had happened. Liam stood amidst the wreckage of the head table. His face was no longer pale. It was flushed with a dangerous, simmering heat. His hands were balled into fists at his sides, knuckles white, shaking with the effort to control himself. He looked nothing like the polished, mild-mannered tech entrepreneur my family thought they had manipulated. He looked like a man who had just watched someone kick a puppy. My father, Desmond, was the first to break the paralysis. He stood up nervously, holding a napkin as if he could simply wipe away the disaster. "Liam, son," he stammered, his voice trembling with forced joviality. "You must have had a little too much to drink. It happens to the best of us. Let us get the staff to clean this up." Liam did not even look at him. He did not look at the waiter rushing forward with a dustpan. He stepped over the broken glass, the shards crunching loudly under his dress shoes. He walked straight toward the stage where Tasha was standing. My sister looked confused. She lowered the microphone slightly, her mouth open in a half-smile. She clearly thought this was part of some passionate display or perhaps a clumsy accident she could laugh off later. "Honey," she said into the mic, her voice uncertain. "Are you okay? You made a mess." Liam ignored her. He walked up the 3 steps to the dais. He did not offer her a hand. He did not smooth things over. He reached out and wrapped his hand around the microphone she was holding. Tasha resisted for a fraction of a second, surprised, but Liam yanked it from her grip with enough force that the feedback shrieked through the speakers, making half the guests cover their ears. He turned to face the crowd. His eyes scanned the room, lingering on the faces of my aunts, my cousins, and my parents, who were still frozen in their seats. The silence was heavy, suffocating. It was the kind of silence that comes before a tornado touches down. He raised the microphone to his lips. His voice was low, terrifyingly calm, and echoed off the walls with chilling clarity. "Stop this," he commanded. "Stop this immediately." Liam did not scream. He did not have to. The quiet, simmering rage in his voice was far more terrifying than any shout could have been. He gripped the microphone tightly, his knuckles white as he looked down at the guests, who had just been laughing. He looked at my father, who was now nervously wiping wine off his trousers. He looked at my mother, whose mouth hung open in shock. And finally he turned his cold, hard gaze onto Tasha. "I have spent my entire life around wealth," Liam said, his voice echoing through the silent ballroom. "I have been to boardrooms, galas, and country clubs. I have seen arrogance. But in 30 years I have never witnessed a display of cruelty as disgusting as what I just watched on this stage." Tasha blinked rapidly, her false eyelashes fluttering. "Liam, honey," she stammered, reaching out to touch his arm. "You are overreacting. It was just a joke. Families roast each other. It is what we do." "Do not touch me," Liam said, stepping back as if her touch burned him. "This was not a roast, Tasha. This was an execution. You invited your sister here, you made her sit by the kitchen like a servant, and then you stood on a podium and incited 300 people to mock her existence. You called her unwanted." He turned to my mother, who flinched under his stare. "And you, Patricia, you called your own daughter used goods. Is that how you see people? As inventory? You judge a woman's value by whether she has a ring on her finger." Liam walked down the steps of the stage, the microphone cord trailing behind him. He walked straight toward my table in the back corner. The guests parted like the Red Sea, terrified to make eye contact with him. He stopped right in front of me. He looked at Leo, whose face was still wet with tears, and his expression softened for a brief second, before hardening again, as he turned back to face the bride. "You asked everyone to look at Nia as a failure," Liam continued, pointing a finger at me. "You told me she was a cautionary tale, a burden, a woman who made poor choices and ended up with nothing." Tasha laughed nervously, a high-pitched sound that grated on the nerves. "Well, look at her, Liam. Look at that dress. Look at that car she drove here. She is a mess. I was just pointing out that I made better choices." "Why are you getting so angry about the truth?" Liam shook his head slowly, a look of pure disbelief on his face. He looked at Tasha as if he was seeing her for the first time, and he did not like what he saw. "You think that is the truth?" Liam asked quietly. "You think her value is determined by the price tag of her clothes?" Tasha threw her hands up in exasperation. "Yes. That is how the world works, Liam. You of all people should know that. You are a CEO. You surround yourself with winners. Why are you suddenly defending her? She is just a bitter, broke single mother who is jealous of everything we have." "Jealous." Liam repeated the word, tasting like bile in his mouth. "You think Nia is jealous of you because I bought you a ring?" "Tasha, look at me. Do you even know how I paid for that ring? Do you know how I built Nexus Technologies from a garage project into a multi-million-dollar company?" Tasha blinked, confused by the sudden change in topic. "Because you are a genius, Liam," she stammered. "Because you are brilliant." "No," Liam said, his voice cutting through the air like a razor. "Because 5 years ago, when every bank in Silicon Valley slammed the door in my face when I was weeks away from bankruptcy, one angel investor stepped in. One person saw the potential in my code when everyone else saw a risk. That investor wrote a check for $2 million of her own money to save my life." He turned his back on Tasha. He walked slowly toward the back of the room, toward the wobbly table by the kitchen where I was sitting. The guests watched him, mesmerized. The silence was so deep you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Her legal name on the contract was not Nia Jenkins. Liam continued, his voice rising with every step. It was the CEO of Green Queen Logistics, the largest organic supply chain network on the East Coast. A woman who built an empire from a used Honda Civic and sheer grit while her family was busy spending money they did not have on appearances. He stopped right in front of my table. I sat there holding Leo's hand, meeting Liam's gaze. I saw the respect in his eyes, the gratitude. He was the only one in this room who knew the weight of the crown I wore in secret. "You called her a failure," Liam shouted, spinning around to face the stunned crowd, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You called her a used product. But in the business world, we call her a shark. And without her signature on my paychecks, without her guidance on my board of directors, none of you would be sitting here eating this overpriced lobster." Liam straightened his tuxedo jacket. He took a deep breath, and then in front of 300 of the city's elite, he bowed his head slightly. It was a gesture of profound deference, a sign of respect that no one had ever seen him give to his own father. "I apologize for this display," Chairman Nia Liam said, clearly his voice echoing off the walls. "I did not know they were treating my biggest shareholder like a servant." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a vacuum where all the air had been sucked out. Tasha's mouth fell open, her jaw practically unhinging as her face drained of color until she looked like a ghost. My mother, Patricia, gripped the tablecloth so hard her knuckles turned blue, her eyes bulging as if she were having a stroke. But the loudest sound came from my father. Desmond, who had been holding a glass of aged Merlot, went limp. His fingers lost their grip. The crystal goblet slipped from his hand and smashed onto the tile floor. The crash sounded like a gunshot. The dark red liquid splattered over his polished shoes and the hem of my mother's dress, but neither of them moved. Desmond stared at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. The daughter he had called a disappointment was the only reason his son-in-law was rich. The narrative he had built for 30 years had just shattered along with his glass. My mother was the first to try and salvage the illusion. She let out a shrill, brittle laugh that sounded like glass grinding together. She looked around at the guests, her eyes pleading with them to share in the joke. "Oh, Liam, you are so funny," she said, her voice pitching higher with panic. "You almost had us there for a second. Calling Nia a shark, that is rich." She took a step toward him, waving her hand dismissively at me. "Everyone knows what Nia actually does. She sells vegetables online. It is a cute little side hustle, really. She packs carrots and potatoes into boxes for hipsters. Calling her a chairman is a bit of a stretch, don't you think?" Patricia turned to the crowd, forcing a smile that looked painful. "My daughter has a vivid imagination, and Liam is just being a supportive brother-in-law. There is no empire. There is just a vegetable stand and a used Honda Civic." Liam did not waste his breath arguing. He did not even look at her. He simply reached into his tuxedo pocket and pulled out his phone. He walked over to the audio-visual cart where the DJ was standing, looking terrified. Liam unplugged the laptop that was queuing up a slideshow of Tasha and his romantic vacation photos. He plugged in his own device. "Watch the screen," Liam said, his voice cutting through my mother's nervous babbling. The massive projection screen behind the head table flickered to life. The photo of Tasha in a bikini vanished. In its place, a sleek professional logo appeared in high definition. It was a stylized crown made of leaves with the words, "Green Queen Logistics Supply Chain Solutions" underneath it. "That is not a vegetable stand," Patricia Liam said, pointing at the screen. "That is the logo of the company that supplies 40% of the organic produce to every high-end restaurant in this state, including the food you are eating right now." He swiped the screen. The image changed. This time it was a screenshot of an investment portfolio. The text was small but clear enough for everyone to see. At the top it read, "Angel Investor Class A Shareholder, Nia Jenkins." But it was the number at the bottom that made the room gasp collectively. It was a transfer receipt dated 5 years ago, The amount was exactly $2 million. My mother stopped laughing. Her face went slack. She squinted at the screen, trying to make the numbers rearrange themselves into something smaller, something manageable. But the zeros remained stubborn. "That is a mistake," she whispered, shaking her head violently. "That is impossible. She borrows money from us for rent. She cannot have millions of dollars. She does not borrow money for rent." Liam corrected her, his tone merciless. "She accepts the allowance you force on her because if she refuses, you accuse her of being arrogant. But look closer at the name on the account that transferred the funds." Patricia looked. Desmond looked. Tasha turned around slowly, terrified to see what was behind her. There, on the giant screen looming over the wedding cake, was undeniable proof that the daughter they treated like a servant could buy and sell their entire existence 10 times over. The silence that followed the revelation of the bank transfer was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. The giant screen looming over the head table still glowed with the undeniable proof of my net worth, casting a harsh blue light onto Tasha's face. She looked from the screen to Liam, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and calculation. I could see the gears turning in her head. She was realizing that the dynamic had shifted. The sister she had treated as a stepping stone was actually the mountain, and she was standing on a precipice. "Liam," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Okay, so she has money. I did not know. But why does that matter? This day is about us. It is about our love. You are not marrying my sister. You are marrying me." Liam looked at her. For the first time since I had known him, his eyes were completely devoid of warmth. He looked at her not as his bride, but as a stranger he had just met in a dark alley. "I thought I knew who I was marrying," Liam said, his voice low and steady. "I fell in love with a woman I thought was kind. I thought you were sweet, misunderstood, and perhaps a little spoiled by your parents, but good at heart. I thought we shared the same values." Tasha reached out, grabbing his lapels with desperate hands. "We do share the same values, Liam. We both want success. We both want a legacy. Please do not let her ruin this for us. She is doing this on purpose to hurt me." Liam grabbed her wrists and removed her hands from his suit, firmly pushing her away. "Success is not a value, Tasha," he said, his voice rising just enough to carry to the back of the room. "Integrity is a value. Kindness is a value. Loyalty is a value. And today, you showed me that you possess none of them." He took a step back, creating a physical distance between them that felt like a canyon. "I watched you humiliate your own sister for sport," Liam continued. "I watched you laugh while your mother called her used goods. I watched you ignore your nephew crying in the corner. That is not stress. That is not a joke. That is a rot in your soul, and I will not bring that rot into my life. I will not let a bully be the mother of my future children." Tasha's face crumpled. The reality was crashing down on her. It wasn't just the wedding she was losing. It was the status, the mansion in Tuscany, the black card, the life she had bragged about for months. "Liam, please," she sobbed, mascara running down her cheeks. "I am sorry. I will apologize to her. I will do whatever you want. Just do not do this. Everyone is watching." "Let them watch," Liam said coldly. "Maybe they will learn something. Because I certainly have. I realized today that I was about to sign a contract with a monster in a Vera Wang dress." He reached up to his left lapel. His fingers found the white rose boutonniere that matched her bouquet. It was the symbol of his groom status, the final piece of the perfect picture Tasha had tried to paint. "There will be no wedding," Liam declared, his voice final. "The engagement is over. The prenup is void. And you and your parents have exactly 1 hour to vacate this venue before I have security remove you for trespassing." He pulled the flower from his suit jacket. He held it for a second, looking at it with disgust, and then threw it onto the floor at Tasha's feet. "The white rose lay on the white carpet like a tombstone marking the grave of my sister's ambitions." For a moment, Tasha just stared at it, her brain unable to process that her fairy tale was actually over. She looked at Liam, expecting him to crack to smile to say this was all a test. But Liam stood like a statue carved from ice, his back turned to her. Then her eyes snapped up. She did not look at the man who had just dumped her. She looked past him directly at me. In her twisted narcissistic mind, this was not a consequence of her own cruelty. It was a conspiracy. It was a theft. She let out a scream that sounded more animal than human. It was a guttural, primitive shriek of rage that made the hair on my arms stand up. She lunged. She moved faster than anyone expected, launching herself off the dais and sprinting across the dance floor toward my table in the back. "You ruined everything," she screamed, her voice shredding her throat. "You did this. You want him for yourself, you jealous witch." She reached me before I could fully stand up. Her manicured nails, the ones she had flaunted all morning as she forced me to hold her train, aimed straight for my face. I caught her wrists, instinctively holding her back, but she was thrashing wildly, fueled by the adrenaline of total humiliation. "You slept with him," she accused, spitting the words out, saliva flying from her mouth. "That is why he is investing in you. You are a homewrecker. You are trying to steal my life because yours is miserable." I did not strike her. I did not have to. I simply held her wrists tight, looking into eyes that were wide with madness. "Tasha, stop it," I said firmly. "You are embarrassing yourself. She is my business partner, you lunatic," Liam shouted from the stage, his voice filled with disgust. "Do not touch her." The security guards, the same burly men who had tried to block me from entering the venue an hour ago, finally rushed in. Two of them grabbed Tasha by her arms to pull her off me. "Get off me, I am the bride," Tasha shrieked, kicking and flailing. As they dragged her back, she dug her heels into the carpet. She refused to accept defeat. She reached out, trying to grab onto anything to anchor herself. Her hand caught the edge of the cheap folding table I had been forced to sit at. Then came the sound that silenced her screaming. It was a loud, sickening, ripping noise that echoed through the ballroom. The custom Vera Wang gown, the $20,000 dress that my mother had embezzled my money to buy, caught on the sharp metal hinge of the table. As the guards pulled Tasha backward, the fabric could not hold the tension. The skirt tore violently from the hem all the way up to her thigh. A massive strip of imported silk hung in tatters, revealing the corset structure underneath. Tasha fell back into the arms of the guards, panting, her hair wild, her makeup smeared across her face. She looked down at her ruined dress. The physical manifestation of her perfect image was now destroyed, hanging in rags around her legs. She looked less like a princess and more like a scavenging animal caught in a trap. The guests were no longer laughing. They were recording. Hundreds of phones were held aloft, capturing the downfall of the golden child in high definition. Tasha looked around, realizing that she wasn't the star of a wedding anymore. She was the star of a viral disaster, and she had done it all to herself. The physical altercation was over, but the financial massacre was just beginning. While Tasha sat on the floor weeping into her ruined dress, the atmosphere in the room shifted from chaotic to clinical. The string quartet had packed up and fled. The waiters, who just minutes ago were politely refilling champagne flutes, began aggressively clearing the tables. Plates were snatched away before guests had finished eating. It was the universal signal that the party was dead. Through the double doors walked Henri, the resort's general manager. He did not look sympathetic. He looked like a man who had seen weddings implode before and only cared about one thing, the bottom line. He walked right past Tasha, ignoring her wails of misery, and made a beeline for my father. Desmond was trying to rally the remaining guests, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Please, everyone," he stammered, his hands shaking. "Just a small lover's quarrel. We will get the cake cut in a moment." "Mr. Jenkins." Henri interrupted, his voice cutting through my father's delusions like a scalpel. "There will be no cake cutting. We have ceased all service immediately." My father puffed out his chest, trying to summon the authority he thought he possessed. "How dare you? Do you know who my son-in-law is? I will have you fired for this insolence. Your son-in-law has just left the premises," Henri said, checking a tablet he held in his hand. And 5 minutes ago, our accounting department received a notification. Mr. Liam O'Connor has revoked the authorization on his American Express Black Card for this event. He has formally disputed the charges and severed financial liability. My mother, Patricia, stopped fanning herself. Her face went from flushed to ghostly pale in a second. "What do you mean, revoked?" she squeaked. "I mean," Henri continued, stepping closer, "that the credit line backing this six-figure event has vanished, and per our contract without a primary guarantor, the entire balance becomes due immediately." My father laughed nervously, patting his pockets as if looking for a stick of gum. "Well, that is just a clerical error. I will sort it out with Liam later. Just send us the bill next month." Henri did not blink. "I am afraid that is not how this works, Mr. Jenkins. This is a destination wedding. The final balance was due upon the commencement of the reception. We allowed a grace period because of Mr. O'Connor's reputation. But now that he is gone, we require payment in full before any guest leaves this parking lot." He tapped the screen of his tablet and turned it around so my parents could see the glowing red number. "The total for the venue rental, the three-course catering for 300 guests, the open bar, the security team, and the imported floral arrangements comes to $85,420. My father stared at the number. I watched a bead of sweat roll down his temple and drip onto his collar. He looked at my mother. She looked back at him with sheer terror. They both knew the truth. They did not have $85,000. They probably did not even have $85. Their entire life was a house of cards built on Liam's credit, and the wind had just blown it down. Henri pulled a portable credit card terminal from his pocket. He held it out to my father, his expression completely flat. "Who will be taking care of this?" Henri asked. "And I need a card that will not be declined, right now." My father, Desmond, looked at the glowing numbers on the credit card terminal like it was a loaded gun pointed at his head. He knew, and I knew, that his wallet was in his pocket. But he also knew that if he pulled out his credit card, it would be declined faster than Tasha had been dumped. So he decided to put on a performance that was even more pathetic than my sister's speech. He started patting his tuxedo pockets with exaggerated surprise. He checked the left side. He checked the right side. He checked the inside jacket pocket. He even checked his trousers, acting as if a leather wallet could simply vanish into thin air. "Oh dear," Desmond stammered, offering a weak, trembling smile to the manager. "It seems I have left my wallet in the limousine. Patricia, darling, do you have your purse?" My mother, who was still clutching her chest as if she were having palpitations, shook her head violently. "No, Desmond. I left my clutch in the bridal suite. We do not have any cards on us." Henri, the manager, did not budge. He stared at them with the patience of a predator watching wounded prey. "We accept Apple Pay, Samsung Pay, or I can have a staff member escort you to your suite to retrieve your payment method." Desmond wiped the sweat from his forehead. He looked around the room, realizing that his friends and extended family were all avoiding eye contact. Nobody was going to step up and pay $85,000 for a disaster. He was trapped. Then his eyes landed on me. The panic in his face smoothed out, replaced by a look of desperate manipulative calculation. He took a step toward my table, his hands open in a pleading gesture. "Nia, sweetheart," he said, his voice dripping with a sickly sweetness that made my stomach turn. "You saw the screen. You are a chairman now. A big-shot investor. This kind of money is just pocket change for you, right?" He walked closer, ignoring the fact that 5 minutes ago he had laughed while I was called a disappointment. "Look, things got a little heated today," Desmond continued, trying to sound reasonable. "But we are still family. Your sister is having a terrible day. The least you can do is help us smooth this over. Why don't you put this on your card? You can write it off as a business expense." I stared at him, incredulous. "You want me to pay?" I asked. Desmond nodded eagerly. "Yes, honey. Just take care of the bill. Consider it a wedding gift for Tasha. It would be a beautiful gesture of forgiveness. For a second, the room was silent. Everyone waited to see if the dutiful daughter, the one who had always craved approval, would finally cave in. Then I laughed. It was not a polite laugh. It was a loud, sharp, genuine laugh that echoed off the high ceilings. I laughed until my sides hurt. I laughed until tears came to my eyes. A wedding gift, I repeated, wiping my eye. Dad, are you suffering from memory loss? There is no wedding. The groom just drove away. The bride is sitting on the floor in rags. What exactly would I be celebrating? The moment my sister became single and unemployed, Desmond's smile faltered. Nia, be reasonable. No, I said, my voice turning instantly cold. A gift is for people you love and respect. I do not see any of those people here. You called me a used product. You called me a failure. And now you want my money. The audacity is actually impressive, but the answer is no. My refusal hung in the air like a guillotine blade. For a moment, my father just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He could not comprehend that the Bank of Nia was permanently closed. He genuinely believed that despite the abuse, despite the insults, and despite the public humiliation, I would still crumble out of a misplaced sense of filial duty. But we are family, he whispered weakly, his voice cracking. You cannot leave us here. They will call the police. Family treats you with respect, I replied calmly, hoisting my purse onto my shoulder. You treated me like an ATM that you could kick when it did not dispense cash fast enough. Well, this machine is out of order permanently. I turned to Liam. He was standing there watching me with a look of intense admiration. He did not look at Tasha, who was still weeping on the floor. He did not look at my mother, who was clutching her chest. He only had eyes for the woman who had stood up for herself. Ready to go? Liam asked, offering his hand to Leo. Yes, Leo said, grabbing Liam's hand without hesitation. I want to go home, Mommy. This party is scary. We turned our backs on them. It was the most liberating feeling of my life. It felt like shedding a heavy skin I had been wearing for a decade. As we walked toward the exit, Tasha scrambled up from the floor, tripping over the tattered remains of her dress. Liam, wait! She screamed, reaching out with desperate hands. You cannot leave me here. They are going to arrest us. Who is going to pay for this? Liam did not even break stride. You should have saved some of that allowance money, Tasha. Good luck. We walked past the stunned guests, past the waiters, who were now guarding the doors like bouncers, and out into the cool evening air of the Napa Valley. Behind us, I heard the chaos erupt. Henri, the manager, snapped his fingers, and 3 large security guards stepped in front of my parents, blocking their path to the exit. I am calling the authorities, Henri announced, his voice booming through the lobby. Nobody from the wedding party leaves these premises until the debt is cleared. Close the main gates. My mother's wail of despair pierced through the glass doors, but for the first time in my life, I did not turn back to fix it. I did not pull out my checkbook. I simply kept walking. As we reached the parking lot, the sound of approaching sirens cut through the valley. Blue and red lights began to flash against the resort's white walls, reflecting off the windows. The police were coming not to arrest a criminal, but to collect a bill from people who had spent their whole lives pretending to be something they were not. I unlocked my rusted Honda Civic and looked at Liam. He was standing by his sleek sports car parked next to mine. I will follow you, he said, to make sure you get home safe. I smiled. It was a real, genuine smile. Thank you, Liam. As I drove away, I looked in my rearview mirror one last time. I saw a squad car pulling up to the resort entrance. Officers were stepping out, handcuffs visible on their belts. My family was about to learn a very expensive lesson about the real world, and I was finally free. The morning after the wedding that never happened, the house on Maple Street felt less like a home and more like a funeral parlor. The curtains were drawn tight to block out the midday sun and the prying eyes of the neighbors. Inside, the air was thick with tension and the smell of stale coffee. Tasha lay sprawled on the velvet sofa, still wearing her makeup from the day before, now smeared into a raccoon-like mask of despair. She was furiously scrolling through her phone, blocking users and deleting comments, but the flood of ridicule was unstoppable. "It is all her fault," Tasha sobbed, throwing her phone onto the cushion. "Nia did this on purpose. She poisoned Liam against me. She has probably been planning this for years just because she is jealous that I was the pretty one." My mother. Patricia paced back and forth on the Persian rug, clutching a tissue. "Of course she did," she snapped, her voice trembling with righteous indignation. "Your sister has always been vindictive. She could not stand seeing you happy, and to think after all we have done for her. We gave her a roof over her head. We helped raise that boy of hers. And this is how she repays us, by destroying our reputation in front of the entire country." My father? Desmond sat in his armchair, staring blankly at the wall. He looked 10 years older than he had yesterday. He was not worried about reputation. He was worried about the invoice that was currently sitting in his email inbox. "We need to fix this," Desmond muttered, rubbing his temples. "We need to get Liam back, or at least get him to pay that bill. If he does not, the resort is going to sue us, and we do not have $85,000, Patricia. We do not even have 5,000. "Oh, stop worrying about money, Desmond," Patricia yelled. "We need to sue Nia. She is the one with the millions, apparently. We can sue her for emotional distress. We can sue her for defamation. She humiliated us. That money belongs to the family anyway. She has been hiding it from us like a thief." Just then, the doorbell chimed. The sound made everyone jump. Tasha sat up, her eyes widening with a flicker of desperate hope. "It must be Liam," she gasped, smoothing her messy hair. "He probably cooled down. He probably realizes he made a huge mistake and wants to apologize." Mom fixed the pillows. Dad, stand up. Patricia rushed to the mirror to wipe her face. "Yes, yes, let him in, but make him work for it. Do not forgive him too easily, Tasha. Make him beg." Desmond hurried to the front door, straightening his rumpled shirt. He took a deep breath, composed his face into an expression of stern, fatherly disappointment, and swung the door open. "Liam, my boy, I knew you would come to your sense." The words died in his throat. Standing on the porch was not the remorseful groom. It was me. I was wearing a tailored navy blue power suit, looking fresh rested and sharper than a blade. And I was not alone. Standing next to me was a tall, silver-haired man in an impeccable charcoal suit. He carried a leather briefcase and wore the kind of expression that made people nervous. This was Mr. Sterling, the most ruthless real estate attorney in Chicago, and he was not here to make friends. "Hello, Dad," I said, my voice cool and even. "We need to talk. Can we come in, or should my lawyer serve you with these papers right here on the doormat?" Tasha took one look at me and let out a shriek that could have shattered glass. She leaped off the sofa, her face twisted in a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "Get out!" she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at the door. "Get out of my house! You have some nerve showing your face here after what you did. You ruined my life. You made Liam leave me. You made me a laughingstock." She rushed toward me, her hands raised as if she intended to shove me backward out the door. But Mr. Sterling stepped smoothly in front of me, his tall frame acting as an impassable wall. He did not say a word. He simply adjusted his glasses and looked down at her with the detached curiosity of a scientist examining a bug. Tasha faltered, intimidated by his professional presence. My mother, Patricia, rushed to her daughter's side, wrapping a protective arm around her. "How dare you bring a stranger into our home, Nia? This is a private family matter. Leave immediately, or I will call the police for trespassing." I looked at them. I looked at the velvet drapes I had paid for. I looked at the crystal vase on the mantelpiece that I had bought for my mother's 60th birthday. I looked at the roof over their heads that they claimed was theirs. "Your house?" I asked, my voice calm, almost conversational. I walked past them and sat down on the armchair my father had just vacated. I crossed my legs and smoothed my skirt. That is interesting, Tasha, because last time I checked the county records, this house does not belong to you. In fact, it does not belong to Mom or Dad either. My father Desmond went pale. He knew exactly where this was going. He tried to intervene, stepping forward with a forced, shaky laugh. Now, Nia, let us not get technical. We are all family here. We can discuss this like civilized people. But I was done being civilized. Technical, I repeated. Dad, there is nothing technical about it. 5 years ago, when the bank was about to foreclose on this property because you gambled away the mortgage payments, who stepped in? Who paid the $200,000 in back taxes and arrears? Who bought the deed so you would not be homeless? I turned to Tasha, who was staring at me with confusion. You keep screaming about your house, Tasha, but you are just a guest here, a guest who has overstayed her welcome. This house belongs to me. Every brick, every beam, every square inch of this floor you are standing on. Tasha looked at our parents, searching for a denial. Mom, Dad, tell her she is lying. Tell her this is our house. Patricia opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. She looked trapped. The lie she had maintained for 5 years, that they were still the wealthy owners of the family estate, was crumbling in front of her golden child. Mr. Sterling opened his briefcase. The sound of the latches clicking open was loud in the silent room. He pulled out a thick document bound in a blue folder. This is the deed to the property located at 45 Maple Street. Mr. Sterling said, his voice deep and authoritative. As you can see, the sole owner listed on the title is Miss Nia Jenkins, and attached here is the occupancy agreement signed by Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins 5 years ago. He placed the document on the coffee table. Tasha stared at it as if it were a venomous snake. Tasha stared at the legal document sitting on the coffee table. Her eyes scanned the bold text at the top, but her brain refused to process what she was seeing. She reached out with a trembling hand and flipped the page, looking for a loophole, looking for her father's name, looking for anything that would contradict the reality staring her in the face. But the ink was permanent, the seal was official, and the name listed under grantee was undeniable. Nia Jenkins. I do not understand, Tasha whispered, looking up at our father. Dad? Why is her name on the deed? You told me you paid off the mortgage years ago. You told me this was our family legacy. Desmond did not answer. He sank deeper into his armchair, studying the pattern on the rug as if it held the secrets of the universe. He could not look his favorite daughter in the eye because the lie he had fed her for half a decade was finally unraveling. Allow me to refresh your memory, I said, leaning forward. 5 years ago, this house was not a legacy. It was a foreclosure statistic. Dad had gambled away the mortgage payments at the Horseshoe Casino. He had taken out a second mortgage without Mom knowing, and then he lost that too. The sheriff was scheduled to evict you on a Tuesday morning. I looked at my mother. She was twisting a handkerchief in her hands, her face pale. Do you remember that Tuesday, Mom? I asked gently, though the question was a trap. Do you remember calling me at 3 in the morning, sobbing? You told me that Dad was going to kill himself if he lost the house. You begged me to do something. You said family helps family. Patricia flinched. She remembered. She just wished I had forgotten. I wrote a check for $215,000 that morning. I continued, my voice hardening. That was every cent of profit my company had made that year. I bought this house from the bank to keep a roof over your heads. I let you stay here rent-free. I paid the property taxes. I paid for the repairs when the roof leaked last winter, and all I asked in return was that you treat me with basic human decency. But you could not even do that, could you? Tasha looked at our parents with horror. You mean to tell me we have been living in her house this whole time, that she owns my bedroom? Desmond finally spoke up, his voice blustering with false bravado. Now hold on just a minute. It was not a sale in the traditional sense. It was a formality. Nia was just helping us out with some paperwork. We had an understanding. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat. The sound was sharp and commanding. "There is no such thing as a formality in real estate law, Mr. Jenkins," the lawyer stated, tapping the document. "This is a fee simple deed. Ms. Jenkins owns this property outright. You are legally classified as tenants at will. And frankly, you are terrible tenants." Desmond slammed his hand on the armrest. "I am her father. I raised her. That money was a loan repayment for the cost of raising her. I intended to buy the house back once my investments paid off." "Your investments?" I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Dad, your investments are scratch-off lottery tickets and poker games in a basement. You never intended to pay me back a dime. You just thought I was too weak to ever call in the debt." I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the driveway where I used to play as a child. I felt a profound sense of loss, not for the money, but for the illusion of family I was finally letting go of. "You thought because I was quiet, I was stupid," I said, turning back to face them. "You thought you could take my money, live in my house, and still treat me like the help. But yesterday was the breaking point." My mother finally looked up. Her eyes were wide, filled with a terrifying mix of realization and denial. She looked at the deed, then at me, and her voice came out in a small, pathetic whisper. "But Nia," she stammered, "I thought you were just holding the title for us. I thought you knew your place." I looked at my mother with a mixture of pity and amusement. "You thought I knew my place," I repeated slowly. "Well, Mom, today, I am teaching you exactly where that place is. It is not above me. It is subject to the terms and conditions I set 5 years ago." Mr. Sterling reached into his briefcase for the second time. He pulled out a document that was thinner than the deed, but far more dangerous. He slid it across the mahogany coffee table until it rested right in front of my father. "This," Mr. Sterling announced, his voice devoid of emotion, "is the occupancy agreement. It is a legally binding contract signed by Desmond and Patricia Jenkins on the 14th of August 5 years ago. It outlines the terms under which Ms. Jenkins allowed you to reside in her property." My father stared at the paper. I could see the memory coming back to him. He remembered signing it because he was desperate. He would have signed a deal with the devil that day to keep his neighbors from seeing a foreclosure sign on the lawn. He just never expected the devil to be his own daughter, and he certainly never expected her to enforce it. "Let us look at the financial terms," I said, pointing to the first paragraph. "Monthly rent, $0. Security deposit, $0. I gave you a free ride. I saved you from the streets and asked for absolutely nothing in monetary value. But if you turn to page 2, you will see that the payment I demanded was not currency. It was conduct." Tasha leaned over, reading the text over Dad's shoulder. Her lips moved as she read the legal jargon, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Clause 4, Section B," Mr. Sterling recited from memory, not even needing to look at the paper. "The tenants agree to maintain a standard of civil respect toward the landlord. Any act of public disparagement, verbal abuse, or malicious conduct directed at the landlord or her immediate family shall constitute a material breach of this agreement." I leaned back in the chair, crossing my arms. "Civil respect," I said, letting the words hang in the air. "That was the price of your rent. It was a very low bar. Most people treat strangers on the street with civil respect. But apparently for this family, treating me with basic human dignity was too high a price to pay." Desmond laughed nervously, waving his hand as if to swat away the contract. "Oh, come on, Nia. This is ridiculous. That is just boilerplate language. You cannot evict your parents because of a few harsh words. We were stressed. It was a wedding. Tensions were high." "It was not stress, Dad," I cut him off. "It was malice. Yesterday, in front of 300 people, you laughed while your daughter called me unwanted. You, Mom, took a microphone and called the woman who puts a roof over your head used goods. You violated Clause 4 in the most spectacular, public way possible." I stood up and walked over to the table, placing my finger firmly on the signature line at the bottom of the page. "You signed this?" I said, my voice cold and hard. "You agreed that if you disrespected the hand that fed you, the hand would stop feeding you. Well, congratulations. You have successfully breached the contract. Tasha looked up, her face pale. What does that mean? She whispered. It means, I said, looking her dead in the eye, that the free ride is over. Mr. Sterling, please inform them of the penalty for breach of contract. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. Per the termination clause, a breach of this nature results in the immediate revocation of tenancy rights. The lease is terminated effective immediately. My mother gasped, clutching her pearls. Terminated. You cannot mean that. You are kicking us out. I am not kicking you out, I corrected her. You kicked yourselves out the moment you decided that humiliating me was more important than having a place to live. You made your choice. Now you have to live with it, literally. For a moment, the room was silent as the weight of the eviction notice settled over them. I watched my father's face closely. I expected shame. I expected him to finally lower his head and admit that his gambling addiction had cost him his home. But I had forgotten who I was dealing with. Desmond Jenkins did not do accountability. When cornered, he did not surrender. He attacked. Desmond jumped to his feet, his face turning a deep, dangerous shade of purple. He slammed his hand down on the coffee table, rattling the crystal vase. Lies. He shouted, his voice cracking with desperate rage. This is all a setup. This document is a fraud. Mr. Sterling raised an eyebrow calmly. I assure you, Mr. Jenkins, the notarization is quite authentic. My father ignored him and pointed a shaking finger directly at my face. You tricked me, Desmond screamed, spit flying from his lips. I remember that night now. You came here with a bottle of whiskey. You poured me drink after drink until I could barely see straight. You waited until I was intoxicated and confused, and then you shoved these papers in front of me to sign. I stared at him, genuinely impressed by the sheer audacity of his fabrication. Dad, I said, keeping my voice steady. You drank chamomile tea that night. You were sober. You were crying. You were begging me to save you from the bank. Do not lie to me, Desmond bellowed, stepping closer. You took advantage of a vulnerable old man. You saw an opportunity to steal my property and you took it. That is what this is. It is elder abuse. It is asset misappropriation. He turned to my mother and Tasha, desperate to recruit them into his delusion. You believe me, don't you, Patricia? You know I would never sign away our home willingly. She drugged me. She manipulated me. And now she is trying to throw us on the street like garbage. My mother, sensing a lifeline, nodded furiously. Yes. Yes, I remember now. He was not himself that night. This contract is invalid, Naya. You cannot enforce a signature obtained under duress. Desmond turned back to me, his eyes wild. You hear that? We will countersue you. I will drag you to court, and I will tell the judge exactly what kind of predator you are. I will charge you with fraud, and I will take back my house, and I will take half of that company you are so proud of as compensation for my suffering. I did not flinch. I did not retreat. I simply looked at him with pity. Go ahead and sue Dad, I said. But remember, perjury is a felony, and unlike you, I have video evidence of the signing. I recorded the whole meeting to protect myself from exactly this moment. The mention of video evidence made him snap. The realization that his lie was dead on arrival was too much for his ego to handle. You ungrateful little witch, he roared. He lunged across the small space between us. He raised his right hand, curled into a tight fist, aiming directly for my face. It was the same fist he had used to intimidate us when we were children, the threat of violence that had kept us silent for years. But I was not a child anymore. Watch out, Tasha screamed, though I could not tell if she was warning me or him. My father's fist came down swinging with all the force of a desperate broken man trying to regain control the only way he knew how. My father's fist never made contact with my face. Before he could strike, Mr. Sterling moved with a speed that belied his age. He caught my father's wrist in mid-air, his grip like a steel trap. With a swift, practiced motion, the lawyer twisted the arm down and pushed my father back onto the sofa. Desmond collapsed into the cushions, gasping for breath, clutching his wrist and staring up at us with shock. He had expected a victim. Instead, he had run into a wall. Assault and battery. Mr. Sterling noted, adjusting his cufflinks calmly. I will be adding that to the restraining order petition. I did not flinch during the entire exchange. I simply reached into my briefcase and pulled out a tablet. I walked over to the 65-inch television mounted above the fireplace, the centerpiece of the living room that I had paid for. I tapped the screen, casting the device to the TV. Since your memory is so foggy, Dad, let me help you clear it up, I said. The massive screen flickered to life. The date stamp in the corner read, August 14th, 5 years ago. The setting was this very living room, but it looked different. The furniture was old and worn. There were moving boxes stacked in the corner, and sitting at the kitchen table were my parents. Tasha gasped. She leaned forward, her eyes glued to the screen. In the video, Desmond was not the arrogant patriarch he pretended to be. He was a wreck. He was wearing a stained undershirt, his hair disheveled, weeping uncontrollably. He was on his knees, clutching the edge of my skirt. Please, Nia, the video. Desmond sobbed, his voice thick with mucus and desperation. You have to help us. The bank is coming tomorrow. They are going to put a padlock on the door. I cannot let the neighbors see me being evicted. I will die of shame. The camera panned to my mother. In the video, Patricia wore no makeup. She looked 20 years older, her face gray with fear. She was wringing her hands, tears streaming down her face. We will do anything, Nia, the video, Patricia begged. We will sign whatever you want. We will be your tenants. We will take care of the house. Just buy the deed. Do not let us end up in a shelter. We promise to respect you. We promise to pay you back in kindness since we have no money. On the screen, my younger self's voice could be heard, soft and hesitant. You promise to treat me better. You promise to stop the criticism. I swear it on the Bible. Desmond cried out in the footage, raising a shaking hand. I swear on my life. You are our savior, Nia. We will never forget this. I pressed pause. The image froze on my father's face, twisted in pathetic, groveling agony. I turned back to the room. The silence was absolute. It was heavy, suffocating, and cold. Tasha looked from the television screen to our parents sitting on the sofa. Her expression was one of total revulsion. She had spent her entire life believing her parents were kings and queens of their domain. Now she saw them for what they really were. Beggars who had bitten the hand that saved them. My mother could not look up. She stared at her lap, her face burning with a shame so deep it seemed to radiate heat. My father slumped in the corner of the sofa, defeated. The lie was not just broken, it was pulverized. So I asked, my voice cutting through the silence. Do you still want to tell the judge I drugged you? Or should I play the part where you kiss my hand and call me your guardian angel? I pressed the power button on the remote, turning the screen black. The image of my parents begging on their knees vanished, but the memory hung heavy in the room. My father sank back into the sofa, a deflated balloon of a man. He knew he had no cards left to play. The assault charge Mr. Sterling had mentioned was a very real threat, and the video evidence proved he was a liar. Mr. Sterling stepped forward and placed a single crisp envelope on the coffee table. It landed with a soft thud that sounded like a gavel striking a judge's bench. This is your official notice to quit, Mr. Sterling announced, his voice devoid of sympathy. You have exactly 30 days to vacate the premises. October 15th at noon. That is your deadline. My mother looked at the envelope as if it contained anthrax. 30 days, she whispered, her voice trembling. But Nia, where will we go? We cannot find a place in 30 days. We have bad credit. We have no savings. You cannot do this to us. I walked over to the fireplace and picked up the crystal vase I had bought. I turned it over in my hands, looking at the price tag sticker I had forgotten to remove. I am not just evicting you, I said calmly, placing the vase back down. I am liquidating this asset. I have already spoken to my real estate agent. This house goes on the market next week. The market is hot right now, and I can probably get $800,000 for it. That is capital I can use to expand my distribution centers in the Midwest. My father looked up, his eyes wide with horror. You are selling the family home to strangers. It is not a family home, Dad. I corrected him. It is a house, a structure of wood and brick. A family home is filled with love and support. This place is just filled with your ego and my nightmares. I am scrubbing my portfolio clean of toxic assets, and that includes this address. Tasha, who had been staring at the floor in shock, suddenly let out a wail of pure despair. She scrambled up from the armchair and threw herself at my feet. It was a pathetic echo of the video we had just watched. Nia, please. Tasha sobbed, clutching the hem of my pants. You cannot sell it. I have nowhere to go. Liam canceled my credit cards this morning. I have no money. I have no job. I looked down at my sister. Yesterday she was a queen in silk, looking down on me from a stage. Today she was a sobbing mess on a rug I paid for. You do not have money, I asked, my voice flat. That is strange. I sent Mom and Dad $5,000 a month for household expenses, and I know for a fact the mortgage is zero. So where did all that money go? Tasha? Tasha froze. She stopped crying and looked at our mother. Patricia looked away, unable to meet my gaze. I know where it went, I said, answering my own question. It went into your closet. It went into your trips to Cabo. It went into the lease on that Mercedes outside. You have been living like a millionaire on my dime while treating me like dirt. I pulled my leg away from her grasp and took a step back. You have 30 days, Tasha. You are young, beautiful, and according to your speech yesterday, you are a perfectionist. I am sure a perfect woman like you can figure out how to get a job. McDonald's is hiring. I heard they offer free uniforms. Tasha stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. She tried to muster some indignation, but the look in my eyes stopped her cold. She knew that I was not guessing. She knew that I had the receipts. I reached into my leather briefcase one last time. I pulled out a thick stack of papers stapled together and highlighted in neon yellow. I did not hand them to her gently. I tossed them onto the glass coffee table. They fanned out across the surface, covering the eviction notice and the deed. Read them, Tasha, I commanded. Read them out loud, so Mom and Dad can hear exactly where their retirement fund went. Tasha did not move, so I leaned over and tapped the top page. Citibank joint checking, ending in 4599. I read, my voice crisp and clear. This is the account I deposited $5,000 into on the first of every month. It was labeled household expenses. It was meant for groceries. It was meant for Dad's blood pressure medication. It was meant to build a safety net for you people. I flipped the page. January 12th. Transaction at Chanel Boutique, Chicago. $8,400. That was the month Mom told me the heater broke and asked for extra cash. The heater was never broken, was it? You just needed a new handbag to impress your friends. My mother flinched, shrinking into the sofa cushions. Tasha looked down at her hands, her face burning. I flipped another page. March 4th. The Four Seasons Resort, Cabo San Lucas. $12,000. That was the week you told me you were at a networking retreat for entrepreneurs. You were drinking margaritas on a beach while I was working double shifts to cover the transfer. I kept flipping faster and faster, listing the charges like a judge reading a criminal record. Neiman Marcus, $3,000. Saks Fifth Avenue, $5,000. Lease payments for a Mercedes G-Wagon, $2,000 a month. I looked up at my father. He was staring at the statements with a look of genuine confusion. He turned to my mother. Patricia, Desmond asked, his voice trembling. You told me that money was going to pay off old debts. You told me we were barely scraping by. You gave it all to her. Patricia began to weep, hiding her face in her hands. She needed to look the part. Desmond. She was dating Liam. She needed to fit into his world. I thought if she married him, he would take care of us forever. It was an investment. An investment. I laughed a harsh sound that made them all jump. Mom, you did not invest in Tasha. You lit my money on fire to keep her warm. I picked up the entire stack of statements and dropped it onto Tasha's lap. $200,000, I said. That is the total. Over the last 3 years, I sent over $200,000 to this house. Do you know what that is? Tasha? Tasha shook her head, tears streaming down her face, ruining the last of her makeup. That is a down payment on a luxury condo, I said. That is a fully paid for college education for a child. That is enough capital to start a real business. But you do not have any of those things, do you? I pointed to the tattered remains of the designer dress she was still wearing. I pointed to the expensive shoes on her feet. I pointed to the branded purse sitting on the floor. You are wearing your future Tasha. You spent $200,000 on fabric and leather to impress people who do not even like you. And now you have nothing to show for it except a closet full of depreciating assets and an eviction notice. I stood up straight, smoothing my blazer. So do not tell me you have nowhere to go. You had $200,000. You ate your house money. You wore your rent checks. And now you are going to pay the price. 3 hours after I left the house, my phone began to buzz incessantly. It started with a text from my assistant and quickly escalated to a flood of notifications from every social media platform known to man. I pulled my car over to the side of the road and opened the link my assistant had sent me. It was a live stream broadcast on Tasha's Instagram account, which had suddenly gained 50,000 new followers in the last hour. The video feed showed Tasha sitting on the floor of the living room I owned. She had removed her ruined wedding dress and was now wearing an oversized gray sweatshirt that looked 3 sizes too big. Her face was scrubbed clean of makeup, making her look pale and fragile. She had positioned the camera so that my mother sat in the background, looking small and defeated in the armchair holding a rosary. "Hey, guys," Tasha whispered into the camera, her voice cracking with calculated emotion. "I did not want to do this. I really didn't. But I have nowhere else to turn. You all saw what happened at the wedding yesterday. You saw my fiancé leave me. But what you do not know is why." She wiped a tear from her cheek. A single perfect tear that she had probably practiced in the mirror. "My sister, Nia," she continued, looking directly into the lens with wide, innocent eyes. "She is a very powerful woman. She has millions of dollars. She controls everything. And yesterday she decided to destroy my life because she has always been jealous of me. She fed lies to Liam. She turned him against me. And today she came to our family home with a lawyer and threw us out." Patricia leaned forward in the background, coughing softly into her hand. It was a masterclass in manipulation. "She gave us 30 days. Patricia croaked, her voice trembling. 30 days to pack up 30 years of memories. My husband has a heart condition. I have high blood pressure. We are old people. We cannot survive on the streets in the middle of winter. But Nia does not care. She said she wants to sell the house to buy more stocks. She chose money over her own parents." Tasha wrapped her arms around herself, rocking back and forth. "We offered to pay rent." Tasha lied smoothly. "We begged her to let us stay until spring. But she laughed at us. She threw the deed in our faces and told us we were trash. She said she is the Green Queen and she does not need family." I watched the viewer count tick up. 10,000, 20,000. The comments section was scrolling so fast it was a blur of angry emojis and hashtags. One comment read, "This is disgusting. I am unfollowing Green Queen Logistics immediately." Another said, "How can a woman be so heartless to her elderly parents? Hashtag boycott Nia." A third one appeared, written by a user with a verified checkmark saying, "We need to expose this monster, share this stream right now." The narrative was setting like concrete. To the world, I was no longer the victim of financial abuse who had supported a leeching family for half a decade. I was the evil corporate villain evicting Cinderella and her poor sick mother into the snow. They did not mention the $200,000 in designer goods. They did not mention the gambling. They did not mention the 5 years of free rent. They just sold the story of the big bad wolf, and the internet was eating it up. I stared at the screen as Tasha looked into the camera with a look of terrified pleading. Please help us, she begged. We just need enough money to find a motel. If you can spare anything, please donate to the link in my bio. My sister has millions, but we have nothing. The donations started pouring in. I watched the notifications pop up on her screen. $5, $20, $100. They were monetizing their own deceit. I turned off my phone and tossed it onto the passenger seat. They wanted a war. They wanted to play the victim card to destroy my business. They had no idea that by going public, they had just given me the legal right to release the evidence I had been keeping private. They thought they had won the battle, but they had just armed me for the war. The storm raged outside the glass walls of my executive office, but it was nothing compared to the hurricane tearing through my digital footprint. For 3 days, I did not issue a press release. I did not post a rebuttal. I did not send a cease and desist letter. I sat in my ergonomic chair sipping sparkling water, watching the graph of my public approval rating plummet like a stone dropped in a well. On the large monitor mounted on the wall, Tasha was currently live on a national morning talk show. The producers had flown her and my mother out to New York, putting them up in a hotel that cost more per night than the monthly allowance I used to send them. Tasha was no longer wearing the sweatshirt. She was dressed in a modest, slightly fraying cardigan, looking every inch the martyr. She is a monster, Tasha told the sympathetic host, wiping a dry eye. Nia cut off our heat in the middle of a blizzard. My father is shivering in his bed right now. We are eating cat food to survive. I watched the host gasp. I watched the audience boo. I watched the ticker at the bottom of the screen display the hashtag Justice for Tasha trending worldwide. The door to my office burst open. It was Marcus, my chief operating officer and oldest business partner. He looked like he had not slept in 48 hours. He slammed a thick folder onto my desk, scattering my perfectly aligned pens. We have to settle, Marcus said, his voice tight with panic. Nia, this is a bloodbath. Our stock price is down 14% since Monday. 3 major restaurant chains have paused their contracts. People are throwing bricks at our delivery trucks. You need to cut a check. Buy them a house. Give them $1 million. Just make it stop before Green Queen Logistics goes bankrupt. I did not look up from the screen. I watched Tasha lean into the microphone, her confidence growing with every sympathetic nod from the host. She was getting high on the attention. She was feeling untouchable. And that was exactly what I needed. Sit down, Marcus, I said calmly. I cannot sit down, Marcus shouted, pacing the room. We are losing millions. Why are you being so stubborn? This is not the time for pride. This is damage control. Apologize to them publicly. Say it was a misunderstanding. If I apologize, I admit guilt. I replied, finally turning my gaze to him. If I pay them off, I validate their lies. And once you pay a blackmailer, Marcus, you never stop paying. They will come back every year for more. I am not interested in a ceasefire. I am interested in total annihilation. Marcus pointed at the screen. Look at her. She is winning. The court of public opinion has already convicted you. She is not winning, I said, gesturing to the monitor. She is overextending. Look at her body language. Look at the details she is adding. First it was an eviction. Now she claims I cut the heat. Now she claims they are eating cat food. She is improvising. She is drunk on fame and she is getting sloppy. On the screen, the host asked Tasha a specific question. So your sister never helped you financially? Not even once. Tasha looked directly into the camera. Her eyes narrowed. She saw a chance to twist the knife and she took it. Never, Tasha lied, her voice steady. Nia never gave us a dime. In fact, she stole from us. She stole my grandmother's jewelry to start her business. That seed money was stolen from my father's safe. Green Queen is built on crime. I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile. There it is, I whispered. Marcus looked confused. What? She just accused me of a felony on national television, I explained. She just moved from vague family drama to verifiable criminal defamation. She claimed I stole seed money. I picked up my phone and dialed Mr. Sterling. "Are you ready?" I asked into the receiver. "I am ready." The lawyer's voice came back instantly. "Wait," Marcus said, realizing something was happening. "What are you going to do?" I stood up and buttoned my blazer. "I am going to release the Kraken," I said. "Get the PR team ready. We are going live in 5 minutes." I did not write a long emotional caption. I did not use a sad filter. I simply dragged the file named Wedding Raw Footage Master. Move into the upload box on YouTube. The file size was massive because the quality was pristine. Liam had hired the best cinematographer in California, a man who usually shot music videos for pop stars. He had captured every second of the reception in 4K resolution with crystal clear audio. Tasha thought she was the star of a reality show. She was about to realize she was the villain in a documentary. I typed the title into the box, "The Truth About a Toxic Family." Then I hit publish. The internet works fast, but outrage works faster. Within minutes, the link was being shared on Twitter, Reddit, and TikTok. The same people who had been burning my jersey 10 minutes ago clicked the link expecting to see more evidence of my cruelty. Instead, they were greeted with the unadulterated truth. The video opened with the wide shot of the ballroom. The audio captured the clinking of silverware and the hum of conversation. Then Tasha stepped onto the dais. Viewers watched in high definition as my sister, the girl who just claimed she was eating cat food to survive, stood in a $20,000 custom gown and mocked a single mother. They heard every word. They heard her call me a cautionary tale. They heard the room laugh. They heard my mother, the fragile old woman currently crying on a talk show, call her own daughter used goods. The comments section froze for a moment, stunned by the sheer malice on display. Then the tide turned. "Wait," a user named Sarah88 wrote. "She said on TV that Nia never helped her. But look at the timestamp at 1400. Liam literally thanks Nia for investing $2 million. Another comment popped up. $2 million, Tasha said. Nia stole jewelry to start her business. This video proves Nia is the angel investor. Tasha is a liar. The video continued to play. The world watched Liam smash the glass. They watched him defend me. They watched the screen drop down and reveal the bank transfer receipts. The proof was undeniable. There was no editing trickery here. There was just the cold, hard reality of a family biting the hand that fed them. I sat in my office and watched the view counter spin like a slot machine. It jumped from 10,000 to 100,000 in the span of a coffee break. The hashtag Justice for Tasha vanished from the trending tab, replaced instantly by a new one. Hashtag Nia was right. I watched the moment in the video where Tasha ripped her own dress and screamed that I was a homewrecker. The camera zoomed in on her face, contorted with ugly, jealous rage. It was a stark contrast to the soft-spoken victim she was playing on the morning show. The internet saw the mask slip. My phone began to ring again. This time it was not hate mail. It was an apology email from one of the restaurant chains that had paused their contract. It was a text from a major news outlet asking for an exclusive interview. I refreshed the page one last time. The video had been live for exactly 1 hour and 58 minutes. The view count ticked over, displaying a nice round number, 1 million views. I leaned back in my chair and took a sip of my water. The truth did not just set you free. Sometimes it burned your enemies to the ground. The internet did not just react, it revolted. The 60-second clip of Patricia Jenkins calling her daughter used goods became the most shared video on the planet within 4 hours. It struck a nerve that went far beyond a family feud. It became a cultural flashpoint. Women across the world saw themselves in my silence. Single mothers saw the insults they had endured for years being broadcast in high definition. Survivors of emotional abuse recognized the look of disdain on my mother's face. The hashtag used goods began to trend, but not in the way my family expected. It became a badge of honor. Successful female CEOs posted photos of themselves with the caption, "Doctors, lawyers, and artists flooded the timeline with stories of how they had rebuilt their lives after rejection." My mother had intended to shame me, but she had inadvertently started a movement that celebrated resilience. Her face became the universal meme for outdated, toxic misogyny. Tasha sat in her hotel room in New York, watching her empire crumble in real time. She tried to delete the negative comments, but they were coming in at a rate of 500 per minute. It was like trying to stop a tsunami with a paper shield. Then the real damage began. The sponsors she had carefully cultivated, the brands that paid for her lifestyle, started to jump ship. Her email notification pinged. It was a message from the skinny tea company she had promoted for 2 years. "Due to values violations regarding bullying and harassment, we are terminating our partnership effective immediately." Ping, another email. This one was from the fast fashion label that provided her clothes. "We cannot be associated with the degradation of women. Please return all sample inventory or you will be billed." Ping, the beauty brand, the teeth whitening kit, the hair extension company. It was a domino effect of cancellations. Tasha screamed, throwing a pillow across the room. These were her income streams. These were the only reason she could afford to eat. Without the influencer money, she was just an unemployed woman with no skills and a massive debt. She grabbed her phone, her fingers trembling as she opened Instagram. She needed to go live. She needed to cry harder. She needed to spin this back in her favor. She tapped the icon, ready to launch a tearful defense, claiming the video was a deepfake or edited out of context. She was ready to lie until her lungs gave out. But the camera view did not open. Instead, a stark gray box appeared on her screen. It covered her profile photo. It covered her follower count. It covered the link to her donation fund. The text inside the box was simple, cold, and final. "Your account has been disabled for violating our community guidelines regarding harassment and hate speech. This decision is permanent." Tasha gasped, staring at the screen as if it had physically slapped her. She swiped up to refresh. The screen turned white. A generic message appeared. "User not found." She tried Twitter, account suspended. She tried TikTok, banned for bullying. The digital walls were closing in. For a generation that lived online, this was a death sentence. Tasha Jenkins did not exist anymore. She was erased. She stared at the black mirror of her phone, seeing her own reflection, stripped of filters, stripped of followers, and completely alone. The audience she had courted so desperately had finally given her what she deserved: silence. The deadline arrived with the precision of a Swiss watch. October 15th, at 12:00 clock sharp. The autumn sun was high in the sky, casting long, harsh shadows across the manicured lawn of the house on Maple Street. There were no clouds to soften the light. There was no rain to hide the reality of what was happening. A black sedan pulled up to the curb, followed immediately by a heavy-duty pickup truck bearing the insignia of the county sheriff's department. Behind them rumbled a large, unmarked white box truck. It was not a luxury moving service. It was a foreclosure clearance crew hired to empty a property in less than 4 hours. Sheriff Miller stepped out of his vehicle. He adjusted his belt, checking the time on his wristwatch one last time to ensure the legal window had officially closed. He walked up the driveway with a heavy, purposeful stride. He carried a clipboard in one hand and a set of keys in the other. He did not look like a man who was there to negotiate. He looked like a man who was there to execute an order. He pounded on the front door. 3 sharp, authoritative knocks that echoed through the quiet suburban street. Inside the house there was a frantic shuffling sound. The door cracked open a few inches. My father's face appeared in the gap. He looked unshaven, his eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. He was still wearing his pajamas, clinging to the desperate hope that if he just ignored the deadline it would go away. Officer Desmond stammered, his voice cracking. "There must be a mistake. My lawyer is filing an appeal. We just need a few more days to sort out the paperwork." Sheriff Miller pushed the door open with a firm, unstoppable pressure. "There is no appeal, Mr. Jenkins. The court order is final. The writ of possession was issued 3 days ago. You were given 30 days to vacate voluntarily. You chose not to. Now the state is making that choice for you." He signaled to the crew in the white truck. "Move in." Desmond tried to block the doorway, spreading his arms. "You cannot come in here. This is my home. I have rights. Sir, step aside, or I will arrest you for obstruction of justice." The sheriff said, his tone flat and bored. He had seen this scene 1,000 times. He knew that pride always evaporated when handcuffs came out. Desmond wilted. He stepped back, defeated. The moving crew swarmed past him like a colony of ants. They carried empty cardboard boxes and industrial-strength trash bags. They did not care about sentimental value. They did not care about fragile stickers. Their job was to clear the floor space by 5 o'clock. Across the street, the curtains in Mrs. Higgins' living room twitched. Then the front door opened. Mrs. Higgins stepped out onto her porch, clutching her morning coffee. She was not alone. The man washing his car 2 houses down stopped scrubbing. The couple walking their dog paused on the sidewalk. The neighborhood had gathered. They watched in silence as the facade of the perfect Jenkins family was dismantled piece by piece. They watched as the movers carried out the velvet sofa. They watched as Tasha's expensive vanity table was hauled down the driveway. They watched as black trash bags filled with designer clothes were tossed into the back of the truck. There was no sympathy in their eyes. There was only the morbid curiosity of people witnessing a train wreck. For years, my parents had looked down on these neighbors bragging about their wealth and their status. Now those same neighbors stood on their lawns, whispering behind their hands, witnessing the ultimate humiliation. The Jenkins family was not moving to a better neighborhood. They were being evicted in broad daylight, and everyone had a front-row seat to the show. The ruthless efficiency of the eviction crew turned the manicured front lawn into a chaotic flea market of broken dreams. Within an hour, the contents of the house had been regurgitated onto the concrete sidewalk. It was a jarring sight. The expensive Italian leather sofa sat crookedly on the grass. The crystal chandelier, which my mother had claimed was a family heirloom, lay wrapped in bubble wrap next to a rusty lawnmower. The illusion of their sophisticated life was stripped away, leaving only a pile of inanimate objects exposed to the elements. Tasha ran back and forth between the movers like a frantic bird protecting its nest. She watched in horror as a burly man in a reflective vest carried out an armful of her prized possessions. These were not just clothes to her. They were her identity. They were the armor she wore to convince the world she was better than everyone else. "Be careful with that," she shrieked, grabbing at the man's arm. "That is a vintage Dior saddlebag. Do not just throw it." The mover did not even look at her. He shook her off and dumped the armful of luxury goods into a large brown cardboard box that had originally held kitchen appliances. The leather purses clashed against the cardboard. A silk scarf fluttered to the dirty ground. Tasha scrambled to pick it up, dusting it off frantically, but the damage was done. Her $5,000 handbags looked like garbage when they were not displayed on a backlit shelf. They looked just like what they were: overpriced leather in a cardboard box on a public street. While Tasha mourned her wardrobe, my mother, Patricia, was fighting a different battle. She stood near the mailbox, clutching her phone with a grip so tight her knuckles were white. She was not looking at the furniture. She was looking for a lifeboat. She was dialing every number in her contact list, desperate for someone, anyone, to offer them a guest room or a loan. I watched from my car, parked a block away, as she dialed Aunt Beatrice. I knew exactly what was happening on the other end of the line. Beatrice had seen the video. She had seen the comments. She knew that associating with the Jenkins family right now was social suicide. Patricia held the phone to her ear. Her face was hopeful for a second, then it crumbled. She pulled the phone away and hit redial. She paced in a small circle, muttering to herself. She tried Uncle Marcus. She tried the cousins in Ohio. She even tried the pastor of their church. Nobody answered. The silence from her network was deafening. These were the people she had gossiped with for years. These were the people she had impressed with her lies about my success being her own. But now that the truth was out, they had all vanished. The phone just rang and rang, echoing the emptiness of the relationships she had built on superficiality. She lowered the phone slowly, staring at the screen in disbelief. She realized then that she was not just homeless, she was an outcast. She had spent 30 years judging people for their misfortunes, and now that misfortune had come for her, she found no mercy. She looked over at my father, who was sitting on a dining chair in the middle of the driveway, his head in his hands. They were completely alone, surrounded by their things, but possessing absolutely nothing. I sat in the driver's seat of my car with the engine idling. The vibration of the steering wheel against my palms felt grounding. I watched the movers toss the last box onto the truck and slam the metal door shut, with a finality that echoed down the street. The show was over. The audience of neighbors was beginning to disperse, satisfied with the afternoon's drama. It was time for me to leave. I reached for the gear shift, ready to put the car in drive and never look back. But before I could move, a figure threw itself against my door. It was my mother. Patricia looked nothing like the composed society woman she pretended to be. Her hair was windblown, sticking to her tear-streaked face. Her expensive cardigan was buttoned wrong. She pounded on the glass with frantic, desperate fists. She was mouthing my name over and over again. I hesitated. A part of me, the inner child that had craved her approval for 30 years, wanted to look away. But the woman I had become, the woman who built an empire from nothing, knew I needed to finish this. I needed to say goodbye, properly. I rolled down the window. Nia. Patricia gasped, thrusting her hands through the opening to grab my arm. Her grip was tight, bordering on painful. She dug her nails into my blazer as if she were drowning, and I was the only driftwood in the ocean. Nia, please, she sobbed, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. You cannot leave us here. Look at your father. He is sitting on a suitcase. It is getting cold. He will get pneumonia. We have nowhere to go. None of our friends are answering. You are the only one left. I looked at her. I looked at the panic in her eyes. It was real fear, but it was not the fear of losing her daughter. It was the fear of losing her comfort. I am sorry, Nia, Patricia cried, shaking my arm. I am so sorry. I was wrong. I was stupid. I should never have said those things at the wedding. I was just stressed. I was trying to fit in with Liam's family. But I did not mean it. You know I did not mean it. You are my daughter, my firstborn. I love you. She looked at me with wide, pleading eyes, waiting for the magic words to work. She waited for me to crumble, to pull out my checkbook, to fix everything like I always did. I reached over with my right hand. I took hold of her wrist. My grip was not violent, but it was firm. I peeled her fingers off my sleeve, one by one. Stop lying, Mom, I said. My voice was not angry. It was just tired. I am not lying, Patricia insisted, trying to grab me again. I love you. We are family. Blood is thicker than water. No, Mom. I interrupted her, pushing her hand gently but firmly back out the window. You do not love me. You love the way I make your life easy. You love the roof I put over your head. You love the bills I pay. You love my wallet. But you do not love me. Patricia froze. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. If you loved me, I continued, looking straight into her eyes, you would have defended me when Tasha mocked me. If you loved me, you would not have called me a used product in front of the world. You see me as a resource, not a person. And this resource has finally run dry. I hit the button to roll up the window. Patricia scrambled back to avoid getting her fingers caught. The glass rose between us, sealing me inside my quiet, safe car and leaving her out in the cold wind. Nia, she screamed, her voice muffled by the glass. Nia, come back. You owe us, we raised you. I put the car in drive. I did not look at the rearview mirror. I did not look at my father slumped on the curb or my sister crying over her handbags. I kept my eyes on the road ahead. The sun was setting, casting a golden light on the horizon. It was the most beautiful sunset I had ever seen, because for the first time in my life, I was driving toward it completely free. Desmond's knees finally gave out. He did not sit down gracefully. He collapsed onto the cold, hard concrete of the sidewalk. The dampness of the evening dew soaked through his thin pajama pants, but he did not feel the cold. He was numb. He sat there, a man in his 60s, wearing silk pajamas on a public street, staring up at the house that was no longer his. The windows were dark. Without the warmth of the lamps inside the house, looked imposing and hostile. It was just a pile of bricks now. The symbol of his status, the fortress where he had played the role of the benevolent patriarch, was gone. He shifted his gaze to the left. Tasha was sitting on a pile of cardboard boxes, weeping over a scratched leather purse. She looked pathetic. For 30 years, Desmond had told himself that she was the prize. She was the golden ticket. He had poured every ounce of his affection, his money, and his pride into her, believing that her beauty and charm were the keys to a comfortable retirement. He had groomed her to be a trophy, convinced that she would marry a king and bring the spoils of war back to the castle. Then he looked at the empty spot at the curb, where the Honda Civic was idling. He had looked at Naya and seen a worker bee. He saw her as dull, reliable, and ultimately forgettable. He had treated her like a utility bill, necessary but annoying. He had mocked her ambition. He had belittled her small car and her practical clothes. He had gambled his entire life on the belief that Tasha was the racehorse and Nia was the mule. He realized now, with a sickening lurch in his stomach, that he had bet on the wrong child. The mule had built an empire while the racehorse had broken its leg at the starting gate. Naya was the one with the strength. Nia was the one with the vision. Nia was the one who had silently saved them 5 years ago, asking for nothing but respect, and he had spat in her face. Desmond felt a hand shaking his shoulder. It was Patricia. Desmond, get up, she hissed, her voice shrill with panic. Do not just sit there like a beggar. Call someone, fix this. He swatted her hand away. There is nothing to fix, Patricia, he muttered, his voice hollow. We broke it. We broke it all. The sound of an engine revving cut through the air. Desmond looked up. The silver car began to move. He watched the wheels turn, the tires crunching over the dry autumn leaves. It was moving away from him. It was moving away from the debt, the lies, and the toxicity. He felt a sudden desperate urge to run after it. He wanted to chase the car down the street, to bang on the trunk, to beg for one more chance. He wanted to tell her that he saw her now. He wanted to tell her he was proud. But his legs would not move. He was weighed down by his own choices. He watched the red taillights of the Honda Civic grow smaller and smaller. They were two glowing eyes in the gathering darkness, looking back at him one last time before blinking out. The car turned the corner and vanished. The silence that followed was absolute. The sheriff got back into his truck. The neighbors went back inside their warm houses. Desmond Jenkins was left sitting on the curb, staring at an empty street, realizing that the poverty he was facing was not just financial. He was morally bankrupt, and the only person who could have bailed him out had just driven away for good. 6 months is a lifetime when you are falling from grace. The smell of stale frying oil had become a permanent part of my skin. It clung to my hair and seeped into my pores, a constant reminder of how far I had plummeted. I stood behind the counter of the burger barn, adjusting the scratchy polyester hat that was part of my mandatory uniform. My feet throbbed in cheap, non-slip shoes. I looked down at my hands. The manicures were gone. My nails were short, unpolished, and chapped from scrubbing tables with industrial sanitizer. Order number 42. I called out, my voice flat. A group of teenage girls approached the counter to collect their trays. They were dressed in trendy clothes, holding the latest smartphones. They looked exactly like I used to look. One of them, a girl with bright pink highlights, stopped and squinted at me. She tilted her head, her phone hovering dangerously close to my face. "Oh my God," the girl whispered loudly to her friend. "Look, is that her? Is that the used goods girl?" Her friend giggled, covering her mouth. "No way. That girl was rich. She wouldn't be working at a burger joint." I stared at the register, praying for the floor to open up and swallow me whole. I tried to make my face blank to become invisible. "It is her," the first girl insisted, raising her phone to snap a picture. "Hey, excuse me. Are you Tasha Jenkins? The one who got dumped at the altar?" I forced a smile that felt like cracking plaster. "Here is your order, miss. Do you need any ketchup?" The girls burst into laughter. They grabbed their trays and walked away, already typing furiously on their screens. I knew what was happening. Within minutes, my humiliation would be broadcast to whatever followers they had. I could see the caption now. "Look where the princess ended up." I walked out to the dining area to wipe down a dirty table. A child had spilled a milkshake, and the sticky pink puddle was dripping onto the floor. As I scrubbed at the mess, the volume on the television mounted in the corner of the restaurant seemed to increase. It was tuned to a national news channel. "Breaking news in the business world," the anchor announced, his voice booming over the sound of the fryer. I kept scrubbing, trying to ignore it. But then a familiar name cut through the noise. "Green Queen Logistics has officially gone public today, shattering records on the stock exchange." I froze. My hand stopped moving. I slowly lifted my head to look at the screen. There she was, Nia. She was standing on the balcony of the New York Stock Exchange. She was wearing a white suit that looked like it cost more than my entire year's salary at this job. Her hair was sleek, her makeup flawless. She held a wooden gavel in her hand, ready to ring the opening bell. She did not look like the sister I had bullied. She looked like a titan. Beside her stood Liam. He was beaming, looking at her with a pride he had never shown me. He was clapping as she brought the gavel down. The camera zoomed in on Nia's face. She was smiling. It wasn't a smug smile. It was the calm, radiant smile of a woman who had won the war without firing a single shot. The anchor continued. "Nia Jenkins, now the youngest female billionaire in the logistics sector, announced today that she is launching a foundation to support victims of financial abuse." The rag slipped from my hand and fell onto the sticky floor. I stood there in my grease-stained uniform, surrounded by the smell of burnt meat, staring up at the sister I had called a failure. She was on top of the world, and I was cleaning up someone else's mess. The distance between us was no longer just physical. It was a universe. And I knew with a crushing certainty that I would never cross it again. The oversized ceremonial scissors were heavy in my hands, but they felt lighter than the burden I had carried for 5 years. I stood on the steps of the newly renovated brick building in downtown Chicago, squinting slightly against the midday sun. Above my head, a fresh banner snapped in the wind, reading, "The Phoenix Center for Financial Independence." This was not just a tax write-off. This was the answer to the question my mother had asked me on the day of the eviction. She had asked if I loved my money more than people. Today I was using that money to make sure no woman ever had to beg on her knees for a roof over her head again. "Ready whenever you are, Chairman," a familiar voice murmured beside me. I looked to my right. Liam O'Connor was standing there, looking dashing in a charcoal suit that complemented my cream-colored ensemble. He was not looking at the crowd of reporters or the local politicians clamoring for a photo op. He was looking at me. Over the last 6 months, Liam had become more than just an investor. He was my confidant, my strategist, and the only person in the world who truly understood the price of freedom. We had not rushed into a romance. We had built something far more durable. We were partners in every sense of the word, bound by a mutual respect that was stronger than any wedding vow. I smiled at him and closed the blades. The red ribbon severed with a satisfying crisp sound. The crowd erupted into applause. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment the Green Queen officially gave back to her kingdom. After the ceremony, we escaped the press line and walked through the quiet corridors of the center. The smell of fresh paint and new carpet filled the air. We passed classrooms equipped with computers for coding lessons. We passed interview rooms where women would learn how to negotiate salaries. "You did good," Liam said, his hands in his pockets as we stopped in the atrium. "This place is going to change lives." "It already has," I replied, running my hand along the smooth railing. "It changed mine. Building this kept me sane while my family was imploding on the internet." Liam chuckled a low, warm sound. He walked over to the large window that overlooked the city skyline. He stared out at the bustling streets, his expression turning thoughtful. The playfulness vanished from his eyes, replaced by a somber gravity. "You know," he said softly, turning back to face me, "I drove past that burger joint yesterday, the one where your sister works." I stiffened slightly. I did not ask how she was. I did not need to know. I sat in my car and watched her through the window for a minute. Liam continued. "She looked miserable. She was yelling at a customer. And for a second I felt this cold shiver go down my spine." He walked closer to me, stopping just a few feet away. The space between us was charged with a comfortable, quiet intimacy. "I imagined what my life would be like right now if you had not spoken up that day," he said. "I would be married to her. I would be drowning in credit card debt. I would be coming home to a house built on lies. I would be miserable, Nia. I would be completely and utterly alone, even with a ring on my finger." He reached out and took my hand. His grip was warm and solid. It was the handshake of a partner who would never let me fall. "You did not just save yourself that day," he whispered, his blue eyes searching mine with intense gratitude. "You saved me too. Thank you, Nia. Thank you for saving me from a hellish marriage." The city lights of Chicago stretched out below me like a blanket of diamonds, cold and brilliant against the velvet darkness of the night. I sat in the same spot where this story began, on the Italian leather sofa in my penthouse, holding a glass of vintage Pinot Noir. But the room felt different now. 6 months ago, this silence had felt heavy, suffocating, and lonely. It had been the silence of a woman who was waiting for a phone call that would only bring demands. Now the silence was rich. It was peaceful. It was the sound of a sanctuary that no one could invade. I swirled the wine in my glass, watching the crimson liquid catch the light. For 30 years, I had believed the greatest lie ever told, that family is a suicide pact. I believed that sharing DNA meant sharing a doom, that I was obligated to set myself on fire just to keep them warm. I thought that if I wrote enough checks, if I swallowed enough insults, if I made myself small enough, eventually they would look at me and see a daughter, a sister, a person. But they never did. They only ever saw a resource. They saw a vending machine that dispensed comfort in exchange for abuse. I took a slow sip of the wine. It tasted like victory. People often ask me if I feel guilty. They ask how I can sleep at night knowing my father is likely sitting on a rented mattress in a basement apartment, or that my sister is scrubbing grease off a fryer. They call me cold. They say I have ice in my veins. But what they do not understand is that the ice was necessary to stop the bleeding. Cutting off a toxic family member is not an act of hate. It is an act of self-preservation. It is the realization that you cannot save people who are addicted to their own dysfunction. My parents and Tasha were drowning, not because the water was deep, but because they refused to swim. And for years they had been trying to climb on my shoulders, pushing me down to keep themselves afloat. I looked over at the coffee table. There was no phone buzzing with angry texts. There were no frantic voicemails demanding money. There was just a book I was reading, and a photo of me and Liam from the opening of the center. That was my reality now. A life built on mutual respect, not biological obligation. I realized that the word family is not a noun. It is a verb. It is something you do. You earn the title of family by showing up, by listening, by caring without conditions. You do not get to claim it just because you share a last name. My investors treated me more like family than my own mother ever did. My staff showed me more loyalty than my own father. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, pressing my hand against the cool glass. I looked at my reflection. The tired, desperate girl who wanted to be liked was gone. In her place stood a woman who demanded to be respected. I had lost a father, a mother, and a sister. But I had found myself. And that was a trade I would make again in a heartbeat. I raised my glass to the reflection, a toast to the empty seats at my table and the full heart in my chest. I had learned the most expensive lesson of my life, but it was worth every penny. You cannot choose where you are born, but you have the right to choose where you belong. I turned away from the floor to ceiling window and looked directly at you. I know why you are still here. You did not watch this entire journey just to see a family fall apart. You watched it because you are looking for a way to put yourself back together. Maybe you see your own mother in Patricia's guilt trips. Maybe you see your own sibling in Tasha's entitlement. Or maybe you see yourself in the old version of me, the version that was too afraid to speak up. I want you to know that breaking the cycle is the hardest thing you will ever do, but it is also the most necessary. It requires you to be the villain in their story, so you can be the hero in yours. They will call you selfish. They will call you cold. They will try to drag you back down into the mud with them. But you have to keep climbing. You have to keep driving toward that sunset. This is not just a story about money. Money is just a tool. This is a story about self-worth. It is about realizing that your value is not determined by how much you can give to others, but by who you are when you have nothing left to give. I reclaimed my life, not when I made my first million, but when I finally believed that I was enough just as I was. I raised my glass higher, the deep red wine swirling like liquid courage. This toast is for you. It is for the boundaries you are going to set tomorrow. It is for the toxic phone calls you are going to stop answering. It is for the freedom that is waiting for you on the other side of fear. If my story gave you even a sliver of hope or a moment of clarity, then I ask you to pass it on. Share this video with someone who feels trapped. Send it to the friend who thinks she has to pay for love. Help us spread this message because silence is where abuse thrives. We need to be loud. We need to be visible. We need to show the world that it is okay to walk away. Click that subscribe button and join this movement. Let us build a community of cycle breakers. Let us support each other as we build our own empires brick by brick. You have the blueprint now. You have the permission. The only question left is what will you do with it? I took a sip of the wine, letting the silence of the room wrap around me like a warm coat. I set the glass down on the marble table. The sound was sharp and final. I looked at the camera one last time, my expression serious and filled with intent. I am Nia Jenkins. I am the Green Queen. And I am finally free. I turned off the lamp next to the sofa, plunging the room into a dramatic silhouette against the city lights. I walked out of the frame, my footsteps fading into the distance. The screen went black. The music rose, a symphony of triumph and new beginnings echoing into the dark. The most profound lesson from Nia's journey is that family is defined by behavior, not blood. We often cling to toxic relationships out of misplaced obligation, sacrificing our mental and financial health for people who only value us as a resource. However, Nia teaches us that you cannot save those who refuse to swim. Setting boundaries is not an act of cruelty, it is an act of necessary self-preservation. You must have the courage to cut off the dead weight to let your own life soar. Remember, you cannot choose where you come from, but you can always choose where you belong. If this story empowered you to stand up for your own worth, hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who needs to see it today.